Every Christmas, there is a moment when the lights go up. Families gather, and you expect at least one message that says you matter. And for 5 years in a row, that moment never came for me, not a call, not an invite. Only the same cold sentence from my own son and his wife telling me not to come and to spend Christmas alone, as if I were a burden that no longer fit into their perfect holiday photos. And I told myself to stay quiet, to stay small, to accept it until this year. When everything changed in a way none of them could imagine, because fate handed me something they never thought I would have. Money freedom and the power to finally choose myself. So I bought a quiet lakeside villa, not to show off, not to provoke, but to breathe, to heal, and to enjoy the silence they forced on me. And that is when the masks came off. Because the moment they discovered I was suddenly rich, they did not call to apologize. They did not ask how I was. They showed up with entitlement in their eyes and greed in their hands, believing they could take what was mine the same way they had taken my dignity for years. But what they did not know was that I had stopped being the forgotten one. I had prepared. I had planned, and I had set a trap. They walked into willingly, and if you think this is just a story about money, you are wrong. This is about betrayal, humiliation, and the quiet satisfaction of watching those who erased you finally face the consequences. So stay with me, because what happens next is something they will never forget, and neither will you. My name is Robert Hale. I am 67 years old, a retired construction supervisor who spent 40 years building homes for other families while trying to hold my own together. My wife Eleanor passed away 5 years ago, and since then, I've learned that grief is not something you get over. It is something you learn to carry like a stone in your pocket that never gets lighter. Christmas morning arrived the way it always does now, quietly, without fanfare, without the sound of wrapping paper being torn or grandchildren laughing in the hallway. I woke at 6, the same time Eleanor used to nudge me awake so we could watch the sunrise together with our coffee. Habit is a powerful thing. Even after 5 years, my body remembers what my mind tries to forget. I shuffled to the kitchen and took down 2 cups from the cabinet, one for me, one for her. I filled mine with coffee and left hers empty on the counter, right where she used to stand while telling me about her dreams from the night before. The house was decorated, simply a small tree in the corner with ornaments she had collected over the decades, a wreath on the door that I almost didn't bother hanging this year. She always said Christmas wasn't about excess. It was about presence. The irony of that word isn't lost on me anymore. I checked my phone 3 times before 8 o'clock. No missed calls, no messages. I told myself I wasn't waiting for anything, but that was a lie I'd gotten very good at telling. Around 9, the phone finally buzzed and my heart lifted for just a moment before I saw the preview of the text. It was from Daniel, my son. "Dad, Melissa thinks it's better if you don't come this year. The kids have activities. Maybe next time." I read it 3 times as if the words might rearrange themselves into something different. They didn't. I set the phone down on the table and stared at it like it had betrayed me. Though of course phones don't betray anyone. People do. This was the 5th year in a row. The 5th Christmas I would spend alone in this house while my son and his family celebrated 20 miles away, close enough to visit but far enough to forget. The first year I made excuses for them. Melissa was stressed. The kids were young. They needed their own traditions. The second year I made more excuses. By the third, I had stopped making them altogether. Now I simply accepted the silence the way you accept weather, something beyond your control, something you endure. I walked to the living room and stood before the fireplace. On the mantel sat a photograph I hadn't moved in 5 years. Eleanor smiling, her hair still dark, young Daniel on her lap with that gap-toothed grin he used to flash at everyone. We looked happy because we were happy. That was before Melissa, before the slow erosion of phone calls and visits, before I became someone to manage rather than someone to love. I picked up the frame and traced my finger along the glass. "You always said I give people too many chances," I whispered. "You said my kindness would cost me someday. Maybe you were right, my love. Maybe you were always right." Outside, I heard carolers moving down the street, their voices muffled by the closed windows. A knock came at the door, probably neighbors inviting me to join. I didn't answer. I couldn't explain why not, even to myself. Perhaps I was tired of pretending that a smile could fix what was broken inside me. Perhaps I simply didn't have the energy to perform gratitude I didn't feel. The carolers moved on. The house fell silent again. As the afternoon light faded into evening, I walked through the rooms the way I often did, touching door frames Eleanor had painted, adjusting pillows she had chosen, keeping her alive in small ways. When I reached our bedroom closet, I noticed something I had somehow overlooked for 5 years. A box pushed into the far corner, half hidden behind old coats I never wore anymore. I pulled it out and felt my breath catch. On the lid, in Eleanor's familiar handwriting, were words that made my hands tremble. For Robert, when the time is right. I stared at that box for a long time, heart-pounding memories flooding back. Eleanor had always been the planner, the one who thought 3 steps ahead while I was still figuring out the first. But this, I had never known about this, was now the time. After 5 empty Christmases, after 5 years of being pushed further and further from my own family, was this. The moment she had somehow anticipated, I carried the box to the kitchen table and sat down, the weight of it heavier than its size suggested. I did not open the box that night. Something held me back. Perhaps fear. Perhaps the sense that once I lifted that lid, something would change that could never be unchanged. Instead, I placed it on the kitchen table and sat with it until the clock struck midnight, until Christmas was officially over, and the weight of another lonely holiday settled into my bones. I told myself I would open it soon. But first, I needed to understand why Eleanor might have left it, and that meant confronting the family I had been slowly losing. The next morning, I decided to try one more time. My grandson Tyler would be starting college in the fall, and for the past 18 years, I'd been quietly setting aside money for his education. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial enough to cover 2 years of tuition at a state school, maybe more. I had never told anyone except Eleanor, who had kissed my forehead and called me a good man. Now, I wanted to let Daniel know to finally be part of something meaningful in my grandson's life. I dialed Daniel's number, rehearsing what I would say. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up, but the voice that answered was not my son's. "Hello, Robert." Melissa's tone was polite but distant, the way you might speak to a telemarketer you didn't want to be rude to. "Melissa, I was hoping to speak with Daniel. It's about Tyler's college fund. I've been saving for years, and I wanted to discuss how best to—" "We've already handled it," she interrupted smoothly. "Daniel and I met with a financial advisor last month. Tyler's education is fully planned. Your input isn't necessary anymore." The words landed like a door closing. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. "I'll let Daniel know you called," she added, and then I heard muffled voices, the phone being passed. "Dad?" Daniel's voice was quieter, almost apologetic. "Hey, sorry about that. Melissa's been really busy with the planning. We should have told you sooner, but everything happened so fast. I've been saving for 18 years, Daniel, for your son." A long pause. "I know, Dad. I appreciate it. Maybe we can talk about it later, okay? I have to go. The kids need breakfast." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen phone, still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that had become the soundtrack of my life. 18 years of small deposits of birthday cards with checks tucked inside of, imagining the day I would hand my grandson a gift that mattered, erased in a 30-second phone call by a woman who had decided I was no longer relevant. The memory of another dismissal surfaced then, unbidden but vivid. 3 years ago, the last family dinner I attended at Daniel's house. Eleanor had been gone for 2 years by then, but her chair still sat at the table. Daniel's idea, a gesture I found touching. Melissa had made roast chicken and the grandchildren chattered about school while I tried to follow conversations that seemed to move faster than I could keep up. At some point, the topic of investments came up. I mentioned something about bonds, about the value of patience in building wealth. Melissa laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively, the way you might laugh at a child who says something naive. "That's such outdated thinking, Robert," she said, still smiling. "Nobody invests like that anymore. The world has changed." The table went quiet. I saw Daniel flinch his fork, pausing halfway to his mouth, but he said nothing. No one said anything. They simply waited for the moment to pass, and it did, swallowed by small talk about the weather and the children's activities. Later, as I was leaving, I passed the hallway and heard Melissa's voice, low but clear. "Your father doesn't understand modern family dynamics. He's from a different era. We need to make decisions without waiting for his approval." Daniel's response was too soft for me to hear, but the absence of protest told me everything I needed to know. Standing now in my empty kitchen, I wondered when exactly I had become a relic, something to be managed, tolerated, excluded. And I wondered why Eleanor's words from years ago suddenly echoed in my mind with new meaning. We had been sitting on the porch watching the sunset when she squeezed my hand and said, "I've already taken care of our future, my love. Don't worry." At the time, I assumed she meant insurance, the mortgage, practical things. Now I wasn't so sure. There was something else too. A fragment of conversation I had nearly forgotten. Daniel, maybe 4 years ago, mentioning casually that Melissa had been married before. "Briefly," he said. "She doesn't talk about it." I hadn't pressed. It seemed like old history irrelevant. But now everything about Melissa seemed worth examining more closely. The box still sat on the table waiting. But something pulled me toward Eleanor's old desk in the corner of the bedroom, a roll-top she had inherited from her mother, filled with papers I had never sorted through. If she had left one hidden message, perhaps there were others. I spent the afternoon opening drawers, sifting through receipts and letters and photographs that made my chest ache. And then in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old birthday cards, I found them. 3 envelopes, each one sealed, each one numbered in Eleanor's careful handwriting. On the first was written, "Open when you feel abandoned." On the second, "Open when someone tries to take what's yours." And on the third, "Open when you're ready to forgive." My hands trembled as I held them. Eleanor had been gone for 5 years, but somehow, impossibly, she was still speaking to me. The question was whether I was ready to listen. I sat at Eleanor's desk for a long time, the 3 envelopes spread before me like a map to somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second measuring my hesitation. Outside, the winter light was fading, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor where Eleanor and I had spent so many quiet evenings together. Envelope number 1, "Open when you feel abandoned." If that wasn't now, I didn't know when it would ever be. 5 Christmases alone, a son who couldn't defend me, a daughter-in-law who had made it her mission to erase me from my own family. And yet I still hesitated because opening this letter meant acknowledging that Eleanor had somehow seen this coming before she died. That thought was both comforting and devastating. I picked up the envelope and turned it over in my hands. The paper was cream-colored, slightly textured, the kind Eleanor always used for important correspondence. My name was written in her elegant script, the letters flowing together the way they always did when she wrote with care. I slid my finger under the flap, breaking the seal she had pressed 5 years ago, and pulled out the contents. A single folded letter, and beneath it a small brass key. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting blurred for a moment before I blinked hard and forced myself to focus. "My dearest Robert," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then what I feared has happened. You've been pushed aside by people who should love you. I'm so sorry I'm not there to fight beside you." I had to stop. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I pressed the letter to my chest, breathing deeply until the wave of emotion passed. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, Eleanor had looked into the future and seen exactly where I would end up. Alone, dismissed, forgotten by the very family we had built together. I continued reading. "You've always been the kind one, the patient one. It's what I loved most about you from the day we met, that enormous heart that sees the best in everyone, even when they don't deserve it. But my love, I need to tell you something I should have said while I was still there to hold your hand. Kindness without boundaries is an invitation to be used." The words echoed something I had whispered to her photograph just days ago. Had she known me so well that she could predict even my thoughts? I saw the warning signs before I left. The letter continued. The way Melissa looked at our saving statements when she thought no one was watching. The way she isolated Daniel from old friends, from his own instincts. The way she smiled at me with eyes that calculated rather than cared. I wanted to tell you everything, but the cancer moved faster than my plans. I ran out of time, Robert, but I didn't run out of love, and I didn't leave you unprotected. I turned the small brass key over in my palm. It was old-fashioned, the kind that opened lockboxes rather than doors. This key opens our safe deposit box at First National Bank, the one I told you was for old documents. I wasn't entirely honest, and I hope you'll forgive me for that. What's inside will protect you. It will give you options I couldn't give you while I was alive. Please trust me, even though I'm not there to explain. The letter was nearly finished. I could see the closing lines, and I didn't want to reach them because reaching them meant the letter would be over, and I would be alone again. One more thing, my love. There's a man named Thomas Reed. He's a lawyer, an old friend from before we met. I asked him to help me with something important, and he promised to wait for your call no matter how many years passed. Trust him. He'll explain everything I couldn't. And then the final lines written in handwriting that wobbled slightly as if her strength had been fading, even as she wrote, "Remember this? Robert, I didn't leave you unprotected. I would never leave you unprotected. You are my heart, my home, my reason for everything good I ever did. All my love forever, Eleanor." I clutched the letter to my chest and wept. Not the quiet tears I had shed at her funeral, or the silent grief that visited me late at night, but deep shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere I had locked away years ago. She was gone, but she was still fighting for me, still loving me, still protecting me from beyond the grave. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel completely alone. I slept that night with the letter on the pillow beside me, the key tucked safely in my palm. When morning came, gray and cold, I dressed in my best suit, the one I had worn to Eleanor's memorial, and drove to First National Bank. The safe deposit box was in a vault I had never visited, registered under both our names. The clerk didn't ask questions, just verified my identification and led me to a private room where the box waited on a metal table. I inserted the key, turned it, and lifted the lid. Inside were documents, stacks of them organized with Eleanor's characteristic precision. I pulled out the first folder and felt my breath catch in my throat. Certificate of deposit bonds matured, totaling $2.3 million. Money I never knew existed, carefully invested over decades, hidden from everyone, including me. Beneath the bonds was another envelope smaller than the first. I opened it and read the single line written inside, "Now find Thomas. He has the rest of the plan." I stood in that small private room at the bank, staring at the documents spread before me, and wondered if I had somehow slipped into a dream. $2.3 million. The number seemed impossible, the kind of figure that happened to other people, to lottery winners and distant relatives of forgotten millionaires, not to a retired construction supervisor who had spent his whole life counting pennies and worrying about whether the roof would last another winter. But there it was, printed in official type across certificates that bore Eleanor's signature and dates from 7 years ago. She had purchased these bonds while I was still working 12-hour shifts, while we were still discussing whether we could afford to replace the kitchen cabinets. She had hidden a fortune in plain sight, and I had never suspected a thing. I remembered now vaguely Eleanor mentioning something about long-term investments during one of our quiet evenings on the porch. I had nodded and changed the subject to something about the garden, trusting her completely with anything involving numbers and planning. That was her domain. I built things with my hands, she built things with her mind. It was a partnership that had worked for over 4 decades, and I never questioned it. Now I understood that her planning had extended far beyond retirement accounts and life insurance policies. The bonds had been set to mature this year, not last year, not next year, but precisely now, 5 years after her death. She had calculated the timing with the same precision she brought to everything else in our lives. She knew that by now, whatever she had feared would have come to pass. She knew I would need this money exactly when I found it. The second letter was still in my hands, and I forced myself to read it completely, rather than rushing to the end. "My dearest Robert," it began, and seeing those words again made my chest tighten. "If you found the bonds, then you've taken the first step. This money is for you to start fresh. I know you'll want to share it to help Daniel to prove you're still a good father. Please don't. Not yet. Buy a place that's yours alone, somewhere they can't reach you, can't manipulate you, somewhere you can breathe without asking permission." I paused, struck by how well she knew me. Even in death, she anticipated my instincts and gently redirected them. The letter continued. "And Robert, there's something else you need to know. 2 years before I died, I established an irrevocable trust. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Thomas Reed is the trustee. He's a lawyer, completely trustworthy, and he's been holding everything in place until you were ready. The trust protects our assets from anyone who might try to claim them through manipulation or legal trickery. No matter what happens, no one can take what's ours, not even family." Not even family. The word sat heavy in my stomach. Eleanor had built a fortress around our finances, and she had done it secretly, deliberately, with full knowledge that the threat might come from within our own home. What had she seen that I had missed? What had she known about Melissa that I was only now beginning to suspect? At the bottom of the letter was a phone number written in slightly larger script as if she wanted to make sure I wouldn't miss it. Beside it, a single instruction: call Thomas, he's waiting. I folded the documents carefully, placed them back in the safe deposit box, and asked the bank clerk to secure everything until I returned. Then I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and dialed the number with fingers that felt clumsy and uncertain. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered. Hello. My throat tightened. I hadn't prepared what to say, hadn't rehearsed this moment the way Eleanor probably would have. Thomas? My voice cracked slightly on the name. This is Robert Hale. Eleanor told me to find you. A long pause followed, so long that I thought perhaps the call had dropped. Then I heard him exhale slowly, as if releasing a breath he had been holding for a year. Robert. His voice was warm but serious, carrying the weight of someone who had been carrying secrets. I've been waiting for your call for 5 years. I was beginning to wonder if you would ever find the letters. I found them, I said, still not quite believing any of this was real. I found everything. The bonds, the trust, all of it. I don't understand, Thomas. Why didn't she tell me? Because she was protecting you, he said gently. And because some things are easier to explain in person. We need to meet, Robert. There's a lot you don't know, and I made a promise to Eleanor that I would be the one to tell you when the time came. I gripped the steering wheel, steadying myself. Tell me what... Another pause. When Thomas spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, more urgent. Your daughter-in-law, Melissa. He said the name carefully, as if handling something dangerous. Eleanor suspected her from the very beginning, from the first time Daniel brought her home. She never said anything to you because she didn't have proof, only instincts. But Robert... He paused again, and I heard him take a breath. She had very good reasons to be afraid. The words hit me like a freight train, scattering everything I thought I knew about my family, my son, the woman he had married. What reasons? I demanded. Thomas, what are you talking about? Not over the phone, he said firmly. Meet me tomorrow, 10 o'clock at the coffee shop on Main Street. And Robert, don't tell anyone about this call. Not Daniel, especially not Melissa. Do you understand? I understood nothing. But I agreed anyway because Eleanor had told me to trust him. And trusting Eleanor was the only thing I had left. I barely slept that night. Thomas's words echoed in my mind like a warning bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Eleanor had suspected Melissa from the beginning. She had very good reasons to be afraid. What did that mean? What had my wife seen that I had been too blind, too trusting, too desperate to keep the peace to notice? By the time morning came, I had replayed every interaction with Melissa. I could remember searching for clues I might have missed, the polite smiles that never reached her eyes, the way she always seemed to know exactly how much money was in every account, the slow, methodical way she had separated Daniel from his childhood friends, his hobbies, his own opinions. I had attributed it to her personality, to the natural evolution of marriage. Now I wondered if it had been something far more deliberate. The coffee shop on Main Street was nearly empty when I arrived at 10. Thomas was already there, seated at a corner table with his back to the wall, a manila folder resting beside his untouched cup. He was older than I expected, perhaps early 60s, with silver hair, and the kind of calm, observant eyes that missed nothing. When he stood to shake my hand, his grip was firm but gentle. Robert, he said, gesturing for me to sit, thank you for coming. I know this must be overwhelming. Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover it. I sat across from him, feeling suddenly exhausted despite the sleepless energy that had carried me here. Thomas, I need you to explain everything, from the beginning. I feel like I've been living in a house with hidden rooms I never knew existed. He nodded slowly, folding his hands on the table. Eleanor came to me 7 years ago. We had known each other for decades. I handled some legal work for her family before she married you. She trusted me, and more importantly, she knew I could keep secrets. What kind of secrets? The kind a wife keeps when she's trying to protect her husband from a truth that would break his heart. Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. She was concerned about the woman Daniel married, not vaguely concerned Robert. Deeply, specifically worried. She had noticed patterns. What patterns? Melissa's obsession with money, for one. Eleanor told me that Melissa asked detailed questions about your finances within weeks of meeting Daniel, questions that went far beyond normal curiosity. She wanted to know about property investments, inheritance structures. She asked about your health, your retirement plans, your life insurance. Thomas shook his head. Eleanor found it unsettling, but Daniel was in love, and she didn't want to drive a wedge between them. I thought back to those early days when Daniel first brought Melissa home. She had been charming, attentive, full of questions about our lives. I had thought she was simply interested in becoming part of the family. The idea that she had been conducting an inventory never occurred to me. There was more, Thomas continued. Eleanor noticed how Melissa isolated Daniel. Old friends stopped coming around. Family gatherings became less frequent. Daniel started deferring to Melissa on every decision, no matter how small. Your wife recognized the signs of control, even if she couldn't prove anything concrete. Why didn't she tell me? Because she knew you would confront Daniel, and that would only push him further away. Eleanor was strategic, Robert. She didn't just worry, she acted. Thomas tapped the folder beside him. That's why she came to me. She wanted to build a wall around everything you had worked for, a wall that couldn't be breached no matter what happened. He opened the folder and pulled out a document. I recognized the trust papers from the safe deposit box. The irrevocable trust, he said. Eleanor established it 2 years before she passed. All major assets are protected, your house, your savings, the investments, everything. You are the beneficiary for life. After you, the assets transfer to a charitable foundation in Eleanor's name. Not to Daniel, not to Melissa, not to anyone who might try to exploit your kindness. I stared at the papers, struggling to absorb the implications. So even if something happened to me, even if someone tried to declare you incompetent, Thomas said firmly, they couldn't touch the trust. The assets are legally separated from your personal estate. Eleanor made absolutely sure of that. She consulted 3 different attorneys before she was satisfied with the structure. The thoroughness of it stunned me. My wife had spent years building a fortress I never knew existed, preparing for battles I didn't know were coming. She had loved me enough to protect me from threats I couldn't see, even as she was dying. Thomas watched me process this, his expression patient. Then he reached into the folder again and pulled out a thinner file, this one sealed with a rubber band. There's something else, Robert. Something Eleanor wanted you to know, but only when the time was right. What is it? He hesitated, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Reluctance, perhaps, or the weight of a secret held too long. Before she passed, Eleanor hired a private investigator. She wanted to know more about Melissa's background, specifically about her first marriage. Daniel had mentioned it once, and Melissa had been vague about the details. That made Eleanor suspicious. What did the investigator find? Thomas slid the sealed file across the table. I don't know all the details. Eleanor died before she could review the full report, but she asked me to keep it safe and give it to you when you were ready. He paused. I think you're ready now. I took the file, feeling its weight as if it contained something far heavier than paper. Read it when you're alone, Thomas said, rising from his chair. And Robert, be careful. Whatever you find in there, don't act rashly. We'll talk again soon. Call me any time. He left money on the table for the coffee and walked out, leaving me alone with the file. I drove home in silence, the sealed folder on the passenger seat beside me. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a long moment, engine still running, hands gripping the wheel. Then I opened the file. Inside was a newspaper clipping yellowed with age, dated 8 years ago. The headline read, "Elderly man dies in fall, daughter-in-law questioned, no charges filed." Below it was a photograph of a woman standing outside a courthouse, her face partially turned from the camera. She was younger, with different hair, lighter and shorter than I had ever seen her wear it. But the eyes were the same, the shape of the jaw, the way she held herself, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. It was Melissa, there was no doubt in my mind. And according to this article, her previous father-in-law had died under suspicious circumstances, just like I might have if Eleanor hadn't been watching from beyond the grave. The newspaper clipping haunted me for days. I kept it in my jacket pocket, pulling it out at odd moments to study the photograph, the headline, the sparse details of a death that had been ruled an accident despite lingering questions. William Garrett, 71 years old, retired businessman, found at the bottom of a staircase in his own home. His daughter-in-law had been questioned but never charged. The case was closed within weeks. His daughter-in-law, Melissa. The same woman who now shared a home with my son, who had systematically pushed me out of my own family, who smiled with eyes that calculated rather than cared. I called Thomas the morning after I read the clipping. My hands were steadier than I expected, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "I need to get away," I told him. "Somewhere she can't reach me, somewhere I can think clearly without looking over my shoulder." Thomas didn't hesitate. "I know a place. A lakeside property in East Texas about 4 hours from here. Small town, quiet community, far enough from Daniel and Melissa that you'll have space. The owner is an old client of mine who's been looking to sell. I can have the paperwork ready within the week." Within 10 days, I was standing on the porch of a villa overlooking Lake Caddo, watching cypress trees rise from water that shimmered like glass in the afternoon light. The house was modest by some standards, but perfect for my needs. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and enough land that my nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Eleanor would have loved the garden, I thought. She would have filled it with roses and herbs and spent every morning with coffee in her hands watching the herons fish along the shoreline. I paid in cash from the matured bonds, leaving no mortgage, no paper trail that Melissa might follow. Thomas handled the deed through a protective trust structure, ensuring the property was legally shielded just like everything else Eleanor had prepared. For the first time since her death, I felt like I was building something rather than simply enduring something. The security company arrived 2 days after I moved in. Young professionals with calm voices and efficient hands, they installed cameras at every entrance, motion sensors along the perimeter, and a monitoring system I could access from my phone anywhere in the world. I felt slightly foolish at first, as if I were an old man playing spy games. But then I remembered William Garrett, 71 years old, found at the bottom of a staircase. The foolishness faded quickly. That evening I sat on my new porch with a glass of bourbon, listening to the frogs sing their nightly chorus across the lake. The air smelled of pine and water, and something I hadn't experienced in years, peace. No one knew where I was except Thomas. No one could reach me unless I chose to be reached. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt safe. My phone rang just after sunset, shattering the quiet. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. We hadn't spoken since that brief dismissive call about Tyler's college fund. I wasn't sure I wanted to speak now, but something made me accept the call anyway. "Dad?" Daniel's voice was strange, almost unrecognizable. Hesitant, fearful. "Daniel, what is it?" A long pause. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel his struggle through the connection. "I need to ask you something," he finally said. "It's important." "Go ahead." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke, his words came slowly, as if each one cost him something. If someone did something terrible, something they knew was wrong, something they couldn't take back, could you ever forgive them? The question caught me completely off guard. I leaned forward in my chair, trying to understand what he was really asking. "Daniel, what are you talking about? Are you in trouble?" "Just answer the question, Dad, please." I thought of Eleanor, of her letters, of everything she had built to protect me. I thought of the newspaper clipping in my pocket, the photograph of a woman who had walked away from one suspicious death and was now circling me like a shark that smelled blood. "Forgiveness isn't something you can answer in the abstract," I said carefully. "It depends on what was done and why and whether the person is truly sorry. Daniel, if something is wrong, you can tell me. You can always tell me." Silence stretched between us. I heard him take a shaky breath. "I have to go," he said abruptly. "Melissa's calling me for dinner. I'll talk to you later, Dad." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat in the gathering darkness for a long time, turning that conversation over in my mind. Something was happening with my son, something he couldn't or wouldn't explain. His question about forgiveness felt like a confession that couldn't quite find its way out of his throat. What did he know? What had he done? Later that night, I pulled out the newspaper clipping again, smoothing the creases that had formed from too much handling. William Garrett stared back at me from the accompanying photograph, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, the sort of man who probably trusted his family completely. He had been 71, only 4 years older than I was now. A retired businessman with a comfortable estate and a daughter-in-law who stood to inherit upon his death. The case was closed as an accident. No evidence of foul play, the article said. Just an old man who lost his footing on stairs he had climbed 1,000 times before. I thought of Melissa's eyes, the way they assessed everything with cold precision. I thought of her obsession with money, her careful isolation of my son, her systematic campaign to push me out of my own family. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the evening breeze off the lake. Before bed, I checked the security cameras one final time, watching each feed cycle through on my phone. The driveway was empty. The perimeter was quiet. The motion sensors showed nothing but a deer wandering past the eastern tree line. Everything was peaceful. Everything was safe. But when I checked my email, a new message waited in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The message contained only a single line: "Your son knows more than he's telling you. Watch carefully." The anonymous email kept me awake for hours. I read it a dozen times, searching for clues about the sender, finding nothing but that single cryptic warning. Your son knows more than he's telling you. Watch carefully. Someone out there understood what was happening in my family, understood it well enough to reach out from the shadows. But who? And why contact me now? I forwarded the message to Thomas the next morning, asking if he could trace its origin. His response came within the hour. The email had been routed through multiple anonymous servers, impossible to track without law enforcement involvement. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their digital footprints. For the next 2 weeks, I focused on settling into my new home, trying to find peace in the routines of daily life. I walked the shoreline each morning, learned the names of the birds that visited my dock, and slowly began to feel like a person again rather than a target. But the calm didn't last. Thomas called on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "We have a problem," he said. "Melissa knows about the villa." My stomach tightened. "How?" "Social media, apparently. A friend of a friend posted something about seeing you at an upscale lakeside property. Melissa saw the post and started asking questions." He paused. "She's been making phone calls, Robert, digging into public records. She hasn't found the trust documents yet. Those are well protected, but she knows you've come into money, significant money." I closed my eyes, feeling the fragile peace of the past weeks crumble around me. What is she doing with the information? From what I can gather, she's furious. She seems to believe you've been hiding assets that should belong to the family. My sources tell me she's already consulting with attorneys about ways to challenge the trust. After we hung up, I sat on the porch and watched the lake, but its beauty no longer soothed me. Melissa had caught the scent of money, and I knew from Eleanor's warnings that she wouldn't stop until she had found a way to claim it. The call from Daniel came 3 days later. I answered, hoping for connection, for some sign that my son was still the boy I had raised. Instead, I heard tension in every syllable. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." His voice was strained, careful. "I'm listening." Before he could continue, I heard Melissa's voice in the background, sharp and commanding. "Tell him we need to meet. Tell him it's about the family's future." Daniel hesitated. "Dad, Melissa thinks we should all sit down and discuss. Ask him where the money came from." Melissa interrupted, her voice growing louder. "Ask him why he's been hiding assets from his own son." "Melissa, please." Daniel's voice cut off abruptly and the line went dead. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. The call had ended so suddenly, as if someone had physically taken the phone from Daniel's hand. I waited, unsure what to do, and then something strange happened. My phone showed an incoming call from Daniel, but when I answered, there was only silence, followed immediately by a disconnect, as if someone had called and then hung up within a second. I checked the call log. The second call had lasted exactly 2 seconds, just long enough to see if I had noticed something, perhaps, or to verify that I was paying attention. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the interrupted conversation, Melissa's demanding voice, Daniel's helpless compliance. The anonymous email echoed in my mind. "Your son knows more than he's telling you." What did Daniel know? And was he trying to warn me, or was he part of whatever Melissa was planning? Around midnight, my security system sent an alert to my phone, not a motion sensor or camera activation, something different. Thomas had installed monitoring software that tracked certain types of online searches related to my name and assets, a precaution he called essential in cases involving potential financial predators. I opened the alert and felt ice spread through my veins. Someone had been searching public records for specific terms: irrevocable trust Texas challenge, elderly parent mental competency, Diminished capacity legal definition. Undue influence inheritance contest. The searches had occurred over the past several hours, methodical and thorough, the work of someone researching how to break through the legal protections Eleanor had built. The IP address traced back to my son's home computer. I sat in the darkness, phone glowing in my hand, and understood finally what I was facing. Melissa wasn't just angry about money she felt entitled to, she was building a case. She was researching how to have me declared incompetent. How to argue that Eleanor had manipulated me when she created the trust, how to tear down every wall my wife had constructed to keep me safe. And Daniel, my son, my only child, was either helping her or too weak to stop her. Either way, the battle Eleanor had prepared me for was no longer theoretical. It had begun. The searches from Daniel's computer burned in my mind like a brand. For 3 days I could think of nothing else, cycling between anger and grief and a desperate hope that somehow I was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation for why my son's household was researching how to have me declared mentally incompetent. But hope is a fragile thing, and mine had been battered too many times to survive much longer. On the 4th morning, I went to the small safe I had installed in my bedroom closet and retrieved the 2 remaining envelopes Eleanor had left me. Number 2 and number 3 still sealed, waiting for the moments she had somehow foreseen. I held them both for a long time, remembering her handwriting, the way she had organized everything with such careful precision, even as cancer consumed her from within. The instructions on envelope number 2 were clear. Open when someone tries to take what's yours. Someone was trying. Someone was researching legal strategies to break through Eleanor's protections, to claim assets that didn't belong to them, to reduce me to an incompetent old man whose voice no longer mattered. If this wasn't the moment Eleanor had anticipated, I didn't know what would be. I broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was another letter in Eleanor's familiar script, along with several photocopied documents I didn't immediately recognize. I unfolded the letter and began to read, her voice rising from the page as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. "My dearest Robert," it began, "if you're reading this, then someone is trying to take what's ours. I knew this day might come. I prayed it wouldn't, but I prepared as though it would, because that's what love requires, preparing for the worst while hoping for the best." I had to pause, pressing the letter to my chest. Even now, years after her death, Eleanor understood exactly what I was facing. She had seen the future more clearly than I ever could. "My love, I need you to understand something," the letter continued. "The woman Daniel married is not who she claims to be. I know this is painful to read. I know you want to believe the best about the mother of your grandchildren, but the truth matters more than comfort, and the truth is something I couldn't tell you while I was alive, partly because I didn't have all the pieces, and partly because I knew it would break your heart." My hands shook as I turned to the next page. The investigator I hired found records that Melissa legally changed her name 8 years ago, right after leaving Florida. Her birth name was Jennifer Morrison. She was married before Daniel briefly to a man whose elderly father died under circumstances that were never fully explained. The father was found at the bottom of a staircase. The case was ruled an accident, but the detective I hired spoke with local authorities who remembered the investigation. They believed Jennifer Melissa was never properly investigated. The case was closed too quickly, they said. There were questions that were never answered. I set the letter down and stared at the wall, my mind reeling. The newspaper clipping I had read weeks ago suddenly took on new dimensions. Melissa hadn't just been present when William Garrett died. She had been Jennifer Morrison, a woman who had changed her entire identity afterward, who had erased her past and reinvented herself as someone new. I forced myself to continue reading. "She's patient, Robert. She's methodical. And she married our son for one reason: access to our family, to our assets, to the life we built together over 40 years. I don't know exactly what she's planning, but I know how these people operate. They isolate their victims, they establish control, they wait until the moment is right, and then they strike." Eleanor's words felt like a map to everything I had experienced: the slow exclusion from family gatherings, Daniel's growing distance, the systematic way I had been pushed to the margins of my own life. "I protected the assets as best I could," the letter concluded. "The trust is solid. Thomas will defend it. But I couldn't protect you from the emotional pain, and for that, I'm sorry. Please be careful, my love. Trust your instincts. They're better than you give yourself credit for. And remember that you're not alone. Thomas will help you, and so will I, in whatever way I still can. All my love forever, Eleanor." I sat in silence for a long time, the letter resting in my lap, the weight of revelation pressing down on me. Jennifer Morrison, a changed name, a dead father-in-law, a pattern of behavior that stretched back years before Daniel ever met her. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, jolting me from my thoughts. A text message from an unknown number, just like the emails I had received before. I picked up the phone and read the words that glowed on the screen. Jennifer Morrison had a mother who taught her everything. The mother is still alive, and she's been in contact with Melissa for months. The room felt colder suddenly, as if the shadows had deepened. Somewhere out there, an anonymous ally was feeding me information. Somewhere out there, Melissa's mother, the woman who had raised Jennifer Morrison to become who she was, had re-entered the picture, and I was standing directly in their crosshairs. The message about Melissa's mother stayed with me through sleepless nights and restless days. I shared it with Thomas, who began making discreet inquiries into Margaret Morrison's whereabouts and activities. The pieces were coming together now, forming a picture more sinister than I'd imagined. This wasn't just one predator circling my family. It was a pattern, perhaps even a partnership passed down from mother to daughter like a dark inheritance. I was still processing this information when my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. Melissa. I let it ring 3 times before answering, steadying my voice. "Hello? Robert." Her voice was warm, almost sweet, a tone I had never heard her use with me before. "I'm so glad I caught you. Do you have a moment?" "Of course. Daniel and I have been talking." She paused, and I could almost hear her rehearsing her lines. "We've been terrible to you. The way we've excluded you from family events, the things I've said, I'm ashamed of myself. We both are. Daniel especially. He misses his father." I remained silent, letting her fill the space. "We want to make things right," she continued. "Please come to dinner this weekend. A real family dinner like we used to have. The kids want to see their grandfather. We all do." Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. The timing was too convenient, the warmth too sudden. But I thought of Eleanor's letters, of the evidence I still needed to gather, and I realized that this invitation was an opportunity I couldn't refuse. "That sounds lovely," I said, injecting gratitude into my voice. "I would like that very much." Saturday evening arrived cold and clear. I dressed in my best cardigan, the one that made me look slightly older than I felt, and drove to Daniel's house with my phone fully charged and a recording app already running in my breast pocket. Texas was a one-party consent state. As long as I was part of the conversation, everything I captured was legally admissible. Melissa greeted me at the door with a smile so warm it could have melted ice. "Robert, come in. We're so happy you're here." She embraced me briefly, a gesture so foreign it nearly made me flinch. Daniel stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but trying to match his wife's enthusiasm. "Hey, Dad, it's good to see you." I played my role perfectly. I thanked them profusely for the invitation, commenting 3 times on how beautiful the table looked. When Melissa asked about my new home, I fumbled with the details, pretending to forget the name of the lake. I asked Daniel about his work, then asked the same question again 10 minutes later, as if I had forgotten the first answer. With each stumble, I watched Melissa's eyes brighten. She exchanged glances with Daniel, small, satisfied looks that confirmed everything I suspected. They thought I was declining. They thought the confusion was real. "More wine, Robert," Melissa offered, already filling my glass. "Oh, thank you. Did I already have some? I can't remember." I chuckled self-deprecatingly. Dinner progressed with painful normalcy. The grandchildren, Tyler and Emma, chattered about school and friends, while Melissa steered conversations toward topics designed to highlight my supposed confusion. She asked about dates, about names, about details she knew I wouldn't have readily available. Each time I fumbled, her satisfaction grew. After dessert, I excused myself to use the bathroom, walking slowly down the hallway with the shuffle of a man older than his years. But just before the bathroom door, I paused beside the kitchen where Melissa and Daniel had retreated to whisper. "Did you see how confused he was?" Melissa's voice was low but clear, asking the same questions twice, forgetting basic details. "It's perfect." "Melissa, I don't know," Daniel began. "Don't lose your nerve now," she cut him off sharply. "We file the petition next month. By spring, we'll have control of everything, the trust, the property, all of it. But what if someone challenges us? No one will. He's clearly declining tonight, prove that. We have the documentation, the observations. His own behavior will be our evidence." I heard Daniel sigh, a sound heavy with resignation, but not objection. He wasn't fighting her. He wasn't defending me. He was simply surrendering the way he always did. I slipped into the bathroom, closed the door quietly, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't confused or declining. He was sharper than he had been in years, honed by grief and betrayal into something harder than Melissa could imagine. When I returned to the table, I smiled warmly and thanked them again for such a lovely evening. I hugged the grandchildren, shook Daniel's hand, and allowed Melissa to walk me to the door with promises of more dinners to come. "Drive safe, Robert," she said sweetly. "We're so glad you came." "So am I," I replied. "So am I." The moment I was in my car, I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. The file was substantial, over 2 hours of audio. I scrolled to the final 20 minutes and pressed play, turning up the volume. Melissa's voice filled the car, crystal clear. "We file the petition next month. By spring, we'll have control of everything." And then even more damning, "Once we get guardianship, the trust won't matter. We'll prove she manipulated him when she set it up." I sat in the darkness outside my son's house, listening to the words that would be Melissa's undoing. She had just handed me evidence of conspiracy to defraud. She had confessed her plan to a recording device she didn't know existed. I smiled grimly and put the car in drive. Eleanor had taught me patience, now that patience was about to pay off. The recording of Melissa's confession sat on my phone like a loaded weapon waiting to be deployed at the right moment. I shared it with Thomas the following morning, watching his expression shift from concern to satisfaction as he listened. "This is excellent," he said, replaying the key phrases. "She explicitly states her intention to challenge the trust by claiming Eleanor manipulated you. That's evidence of premeditated fraud. Combined with what we already have, their case is falling apart before it's even filed." But we both knew they would file anyway. Melissa was too committed to her plan, too confident in her own cunning to back down now. We simply had to wait for her next move. The wait lasted exactly 12 days. Thomas called on a Thursday afternoon, his voice carrying a weight I recognized immediately. "Robert, I need you to sit down." I was already sitting, but his tone made me grip the armrest of my chair. "What happened?" "A petition for guardianship was filed this morning with the county court. The petition claims you are experiencing cognitive decline and are unable to manage your financial affairs safely. It requests that Daniel be appointed as your legal guardian, with Melissa listed as backup in case Daniel is unable to serve." The words landed like hammer blows, each one driving deeper than the last. I had known this was coming. I had prepared for it. But knowing and experiencing are different things, and nothing could have prepared me for the pain that followed Thomas's next sentence. "Daniel signed the petition, Robert. His signature is on the document." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the lake outside my window, at the cypress trees and the herons and the peaceful water that had become my refuge, and I felt something break inside me that I hadn't known was still intact. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle. The young man I had walked through his first heartbreak. The father of my grandchildren. He had signed a legal document declaring me incompetent, declaring that I could no longer be trusted to manage my own life. "Robert, are you still there?" "I'm here." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. Thomas continued, his tone gentle but firm. "We're going to fight this. The recordings you made at dinner are powerful evidence of their true intentions. Eleanor's documentation proves the trust was established years before any alleged decline. And the petition itself is thin. They're relying on anecdotal observations rather than medical evidence. Any competent judge will see through it." "But Daniel signed it," I said, unable to move past that single, devastating fact. "Yes." Thomas paused. "But Robert, I need you to understand something. I've seen the document. I obtained a copy from the courthouse this afternoon. Daniel's signature—" He stopped as if choosing his words carefully. It was shaking. The pen pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. Whatever Daniel was feeling when he signed it wasn't confidence. It was fear. Fear. The word hung between us. Fear of what? Of Melissa, of losing his family, of becoming the man he knew he was becoming. I thanked Thomas and ended the call, then sat in silence as the sun descended toward the lake. The betrayal felt physical, a wound that throbbed with each heartbeat. I thought of Eleanor, of how she had loved Daniel with every fiber of her being, of how she had held him as an infant and wept with joy at his birth. What would she think now, knowing her son had become this? Around midnight, unable to sleep, I checked my email and found another message from the anonymous sender. This time there was an attachment, a screenshot that took several seconds to load on my aging phone. When it finally appeared, I leaned closer, squinting at the image. It was a photograph of a phone screen, Daniel's phone, based on the wallpaper I recognized from family photos. On the screen was a file folder labeled Evidence SML. Inside the folder were dozens of items, audio files with dates stretching back over 2 years, screenshots of text messages, scanned documents, photographs. The email's message was brief. He's been collecting proof against her. He's too scared to use it, but it exists. I stared at the screenshot until my eyes burned. For 2 years, Daniel had been secretly documenting something: Melissa's behavior, presumably. Audio recordings, text messages, documents. He had built a file of evidence against his own wife while living under the same roof, while sharing her bed, while letting her poison him against his own father. And yet, he had still signed the petition. He had still put his name to a document designed to strip me of my autonomy, my dignity, my right to control my own life. I set the phone down and walked to the window, watching moonlight ripple across the dark water. Which man was my son, really? Was he the conspirator who had joined Melissa in her scheme to take everything I had? Or was he the secret witness gathering evidence while too terrified to act, too trapped to escape? The answer, I realized, might be both. And that was perhaps the most painful truth of all. Daniel wasn't simply a villain in this story. He was something more complicated, a man caught between fear and conscience, between loyalty and cowardice, between the father he had abandoned and the wife who controlled him. But understanding didn't mean forgiving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The petition was filed. The battle had officially begun. The screenshot of Daniel's evidence folder haunted me for days. I shared it with Thomas, who agreed that my son was more complicated than either villain or victim. He's been building a case against her for 2 years, Thomas said. That suggests he knows exactly what she is. But knowing and acting are different things. Fear can paralyze even good men. I wanted to believe Daniel was still a good man. I wanted to believe the boy I raised was still in there somewhere, buried beneath years of Melissa's control. But belief is a luxury, and I had run out of faith. What I did have was preparation. The security system at my villa was state-of-the-art, with cameras covering every approach and motion sensors that would alert my phone the moment anyone crossed onto the property. Thomas had also connected the system to a monitoring service that could dispatch police within minutes. Whatever Melissa was planning, I would see it coming. The alert came on a Tuesday night just after 10 o'clock. I wasn't at the villa. Thomas had suggested I stay at a hotel in a nearby town for a few days, creating the appearance of absence while remaining close enough to respond if needed. Melissa had apparently told Daniel that I was in Houston for medical tests, a trip that existed only in her imagination. She believed the house was empty, unguarded, ripe for exploitation. My phone buzzed with the first motion sensor alert: perimeter breach, eastern driveway. I opened the security app and watched as a dark sedan rolled slowly up the gravel road toward my home. The headlights cut off before the car reached the final curve, and it drifted to a stop about 50 yards from the house. 2 figures sat in the front seats. Even through the grainy night vision footage, I recognized them. Melissa in the passenger seat, her posture rigid with purpose. Daniel behind the wheel, his movements hesitant, uncertain. They sat there for several minutes, and I wished desperately that I could hear what they were saying. Melissa appeared to be talking rapidly, gesturing toward the house. Daniel's head was bowed, his hands gripping the steering wheel even though the car was stationary. Something was happening between them, some argument or instruction that I couldn't decipher from the silent video feed. Then Melissa opened her door and stepped out. She stood beside the car for a moment, looking back at Daniel through the window. I could see her lips moving, her expression impatient. She gestured sharply toward the house. Daniel didn't move. Melissa said something else, then turned and started walking toward the villa. Her phone's flashlight cut through the darkness, bobbing with each step as she approached my home with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. I watched, heart pounding, as she crossed the lawn and stepped onto the porch. She tried the front door, found it locked, and moved around to the side of the house. The cameras tracked her every movement, recording everything in crisp detail. But something else was happening back at the car. I switched to the driveway camera and saw that Daniel was still sitting behind the wheel. He hadn't followed his wife. He hadn't even opened his door. Instead, he appeared to be looking at something in his hands, his phone, I realized. The screen glowed faintly in the darkness, illuminating his face. For nearly 2 minutes he sat motionless, staring at the phone. Then, without warning, the car's reverse lights flared to life. The sedan backed down the driveway slowly at first, then faster, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Daniel executed a clumsy 3-point turn at the bottom of the hill and drove away, his headlights disappearing into the night. He had left her. He had driven Melissa to my property and then abandoned her there alone in the middle of her crime. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. Why would Daniel leave? What had changed in those minutes sitting in the car? What had he seen or heard or decided that made him put the car in reverse and flee? The answers would come later. Right now, Melissa was still on my property, circling the house like a predator seeking entry. I watched as she found a window on the back porch, one that appeared to be latched from inside, but had a small gap where the old wood had warped. She pulled something from her pocket, a tool of some kind, thin and metallic. Within seconds, she had worked the latch open and was climbing through the window into my home. The interior cameras tracked her as she moved through the rooms, her flashlight beam sweeping across furniture and walls. She went straight for my study, for the desk where she probably assumed I kept important documents. She began opening drawers, rifling through papers, photographing everything with her phone. She had no idea that every second of her search was being recorded from multiple angles. I called Thomas first, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "She's inside, breaking and entering caught on camera. I'm calling the police now," he replied. "Stay where you are. Don't approach the property." My second call was to the monitoring service, confirming the breach and authorizing them to dispatch law enforcement. The nearest sheriff's station was 12 minutes away. Then I sat back and watched my daughter-in-law incriminate herself frame by frame, crime by crime. But even as I watched Melissa destroy her own future, my mind kept returning to Daniel. He had driven away. He had abandoned her at the scene. Something had happened in that car, some breaking point that even 2 years of accumulated fear couldn't suppress. My son was still in there somewhere, and tonight, for the first time in years, he had made a choice. From my hotel room 15 miles away, I watched Melissa move through my home like a thief in a museum, unaware that every step, every gesture, every word was being captured by cameras she didn't know existed. The footage was remarkably clear. Thomas had insisted on high-definition equipment with superior audio capabilities, and now I understood why. This wasn't just surveillance. It was documentation of a crime in progress. Melissa had made her way to my study, where she pulled open drawer after drawer, scattering papers across the floor in her haste. The audio feed picked up her breathing heavy and agitated, along with a running commentary that would have been comical if it weren't so chilling. "Where is it?" she muttered, slamming one drawer shut and yanking open another. "The old fool has to keep records somewhere. Nobody hides this much money without a paper trail." She moved to the filing cabinet in the corner, the one where I kept household documents and old tax returns. Nothing of value was there. Thomas had secured everything important long ago, but she didn't know that. "Stupid old man thinks he's clever," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "Eleanor was the smart one, but she's dead now. Soon he will be too, and then none of this will matter." The words hit me like ice water. Soon he will be too. She wasn't just talking about taking my money or controlling my affairs. She was talking about ending my life, spoken as casually as someone discussing weekend plans. I had suspected, of course, after reading about William Garrett, after learning about Florida. But hearing her say it out loud, watching her lips form the words on my phone screen, transformed suspicion into certainty. She continued searching for another 10 minutes, growing increasingly frantic as she failed to find what she was looking for. She overturned boxes, rifled through bookcases, even pulled cushions from the couch, as if I might have hidden trust documents beneath the upholstery. All the while, the cameras recorded the audio captured, and the silent alarm that had triggered 15 minutes earlier brought justice steadily closer. I saw the police cars before she did. 3 vehicles approached without sirens, their headlights dark rolling up the driveway with the quiet precision of predators closing in on prey. The lead car stopped near the porch, and a figure stepped out. A woman in plain clothes, her badge visible on her belt, her posture radiating authority. Officer Linda Carver. Thomas had mentioned her name when he called to confirm the police response. She had specifically requested this call, he said, as soon as she heard the name Jennifer Morrison connected to the property. At the time, I didn't understand the significance. Now, watching her approach my front door, I began to. The other officers fanned out around the house covering exits, while Linda and her partner entered through the front door. I watched on split screen as Melissa, still in my study, suddenly froze at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. "Police, show yourself." For a moment, Melissa seemed to consider running. Her eyes darted toward the window, calculating escape routes. Then the officers appeared in the doorway, weapons drawn, and calculation gave way to panic. "I'm family," she screamed, raising her hands. "I have a right to be here. This is my father-in-law's home." "Ma'am, step away from the desk, hands where we can see them." Melissa complied, but her mouth kept running. "This is a misunderstanding. I came to check on the property. My father-in-law asked me to—" "That's enough." Linda Carver stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. She carried a folder under her arm, the same thin folder Thomas had shown me weeks ago. "Mrs. Hale," she said, and then paused, a slight smile crossing her face. "Or should I say Ms. Jennifer Morrison? I've been waiting 8 years to meet you." The color drained from Melissa's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened, opened again, but no words came out. Linda continued, her tone almost conversational. "I was the detective who investigated the death of William Garrett in Florida, the elderly man whose daughter-in-law stood to inherit his entire estate. You remember William, don't you, Jennifer? 71 years old, found at the bottom of his own staircase, ruled an accidental fall despite several inconsistencies in the evidence." "I don't know what you're talking about," Melissa whispered, but her voice had lost all its usual confidence. "The case was closed as an accident," Linda said. "Pressure from above, insufficient evidence, the usual excuses. But I never believed it. I never stopped believing that William Garrett was murdered by someone who thought she was too clever to get caught." She held up a pair of handcuffs, the metal glinting in the overhead light. "Breaking and entering is just the beginning of your problems tonight, Ms. Morrison. We have you on camera, on audio, threatening the life of Robert Hale. That's enough to hold you while we reopen a very cold case that just got very warm." The officers moved forward to secure Melissa's hands behind her back. She struggled briefly, then seemed to realize the futility of resistance. As they led her toward the front door, her head swiveled frantically, searching for someone outside. "Daniel!" she screamed as they crossed the porch. "Daniel, call the lawyer, Daniel!" But the driveway was empty. The dark sedan that had brought her here was gone, vanished into the night along with the husband she had controlled for years. Daniel had made his choice. He had left her to face the consequences alone. "Daniel!" Her voice cracked, rising to a shriek as the officers guided her into the back of the patrol car. "Daniel!" The door slammed shut, muffling her cries. Through the window, I could see her face pressed against the glass, mascara smearing as tears cut tracks through her carefully applied makeup. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The predator transformed into prey. For the first time in her life, Melissa understood what it meant to be truly alone. And watching from my hotel room, I felt something I hadn't expected, not triumph, not satisfaction, but a profound and exhausted relief. The trap Eleanor had helped me build had finally closed. Thomas picked me up from the hotel before dawn and drove me to the county sheriff's station where Linda Carver had promised a full briefing on what they had uncovered. The night had been long and sleepless, filled with replayed footage and racing thoughts. But I felt strangely calm as we walked through the station's front doors. The trap had sprung. The predator was caged. Now it was time to understand exactly what we had caught. Linda met us in a small conference room lined with whiteboards and case files. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who had waited years for a moment that had finally arrived. "Mr. Hale, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for us to sit. "I know this has been an overwhelming night, but I think you deserve to hear the full story. All of it." She opened a thick folder and spread its contents across the table. Photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, court records, a mosaic of evidence that painted a picture far darker than I had imagined. "Your daughter-in-law was born Jennifer Morrison in Tallahassee, Florida, 41 years ago," Linda began. "She had a difficult childhood by most accounts, absent father-mother with a criminal record for fraud and embezzlement. By the time Jennifer was in her 20s, she had learned every trick her mother knew, and then some." She slid a photograph across the table, a younger Melissa, perhaps early 30s, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. 9 years ago, Jennifer married Gregory Garrett, the only son of William Garrett, a retired businessman worth approximately $3 million. The marriage was quick. They met, got engaged, and were married within 6 months. Sound familiar? I nodded slowly, remembering how fast things had moved between Daniel and Melissa. At the time, I thought it was romantic. Now I recognized it as predatory. Within a year of the marriage, Jennifer had isolated Gregory from most of his friends and family, Linda continued. She convinced him to move closer to his father ostensibly to help with the old man's care. In reality, she was positioning herself for access to the estate. She paused, her expression hardening. William Garrett died 18 months after Jennifer entered the family. He was found at the bottom of the staircase in his own home. The official ruling was accidental fall, but there were inconsistencies. Bruising that didn't match a simple tumble, a cleaned railing that should have had fingerprints. The housekeeper reported hearing an argument earlier that evening. Why wasn't she charged at? Thomas asked. Politics, pressure. The Garrett family had connections, and some of them preferred a quiet resolution to a scandal. Jennifer walked away with a settlement of nearly $500,000. Gregory divorced her within the year. He couldn't prove anything, but he knew. Everyone knew. Linda's jaw tightened. 6 months later, Jennifer Morrison legally changed her name to Melissa Ashford and relocated to Texas. She disappeared so completely that I lost track of her until 2 weeks ago when Thomas Reed contacted me about a woman matching her description. I stared at the documents spread before me, the evidence of a pattern so clear it seemed impossible I had missed it. Target families with elderly parents, marry the son. Isolate the parent, gain control of assets through manipulation or guardianship, or when necessary, something far worse. William Garrett had been her first victim. I was meant to be her second. Linda produced another document, the guardianship petition Daniel had signed. This is textbook elder abuse, she said. Filing a fraudulent petition to gain control of a competent adult's finances is a felony in Texas, combined with tonight's breaking and entering the recorded statements about handling you, the way she handled Florida, and her documented history of targeting elderly victims. We're looking at federal charges. Wire fraud, conspiracy, potentially even racketeering if we can connect her mother's involvement. You mentioned her mother before, I said. Margaret Morrison. Linda nodded. We've been tracking Margaret for years, but she's careful, never directly involved, always working through Jennifer. The anonymous tips you received. We believe they came from someone inside their operation who got cold feet. We're still trying to identify the source. She gathered the documents and stood. There's one more thing I'd like you to see, Mr. Hale, if you're willing. She led me down a corridor to a door with a small window, the observation room for interview 2. Through the one-way glass, I could see Melissa Jennifer sitting at a metal table, her wrists cuffed, her expensive clothes rumpled and stained. The polished veneer had cracked completely. She looked exactly like what she was, a cornered animal with nowhere left to run. A detective sat across from her, methodically presenting evidence. With each new document, each new photograph, Melissa's composure deteriorated further. She tried denial first, then confusion, then outrage. None of it worked. Finally, desperation took over. This wasn't my idea, she shouted, her voice cracking. Daniel planned everything. He's the one who wanted his father's money. I just went along with it because I was scared of him. The detective remained impassive. We have recordings of you giving instructions, Ms. Morrison. Your husband wasn't even present during most of the planning. Melissa's face contorted with rage. Then it was my mother. She's the one who taught me everything, who pushed me into this life. Margaret Morrison, she's the real criminal. She's been directing this from the beginning. We're already looking into your mother, the detective replied calmly. But right now we're focused on you. I watched as the woman who had terrorized my family for years finally broke down completely, sobbing and screaming and blaming everyone but herself. There was no satisfaction in it, no triumph. Only a deep, tired relief that it was finally over. Linda appeared beside me, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Hale, there's someone waiting for you in the lobby. He arrived about an hour ago carrying something he says he's been holding for 2 years. My heart tightened. I didn't need to ask who it was. He looked scared, Linda added gently. But he came anyway. That has to count for something. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the conversation I had both dreaded and hoped for since this nightmare began. Then I turned away from the glass and walked toward the lobby, toward my son, toward whatever came next. The walk from the observation room to the lobby felt longer than it should have, each step carrying the weight of years of silence, misunderstanding, and betrayal. I didn't know what I would find when I reached my son. The man who had signed a petition to have me declared incompetent. The The man who had driven his wife to my home and then abandoned her there. The man who had apparently been fighting a secret war against the woman he married while appearing to be her willing accomplice. I found him sitting on a plastic chair near the water fountain, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at something in his hands. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, not physically, but somehow diminished, as if the weight of his secrets had compressed him into a fraction of the man he used to be. His hair was disheveled, his clothes the same ones he had worn the night before, and his eyes were red-rimmed from what I assumed was a sleepless night of his own. When he saw me approaching, he stood quickly, almost knocking over the chair. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, he simply held out his hands, palms up, offering me what he was holding, a small USB drive, black and unremarkable, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. "Dad?" His voice cracked on the single syllable. I stopped a few feet away, looking at the drive, then at his face. I didn't speak. I wasn't sure I could. Daniel swallowed hard and began talking, the words tumbling out as if he had been holding them back for years and couldn't contain them any longer. "I've been recording her for 2 years, he said. Conversations when she didn't know I was listening, emails I found on her laptop, screenshots of her research, the guardianship laws, the trust challenges, everything. I knew what she was planning, Dad. I knew what she wanted to do to you." His voice broke again and he paused to steady himself. "I knew what she did in Florida. I found the newspaper clipping in her drawer, hidden under old clothes. I recognized the woman in the photograph even though she had different hair. I knew who I was married to." I remained silent, watching him struggle with each confession. "I was too scared to stop her," he continued, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm still scared. She controlled everything, the finances, the house, even how I talked to my own children. If I stepped out of line, she threatened to leave and take Tyler and Emma. She said she'd tell them terrible things about me, turn them against me forever." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "But I couldn't let her hurt you. Not you. Not after everything, Mom." He couldn't finish the sentence. I took a step closer and Daniel flinched as if expecting a blow. Instead, I sat down on the chair beside his, my knees protesting the plastic seat, and waited. Daniel sat too still, clutching the USB drive. "The anonymous email," he said quietly. "Those were from me. I couldn't send them from my own account. She monitors everything. My phone, my laptop, even my browsing history. So I set up a burner email at the public library using a computer she couldn't trace. I sent you the warnings, the screenshots, everything I could without revealing myself." He pressed the USB drive into my hands, his fingers trembling. "This is everything, Dad. Every recording, every screenshot, every email between her and her mother. 2 years of evidence that proves exactly what she is and what she was planning. It's all here." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I should have given it to you years ago. I should have been braver. I should have been the son you raised instead of the coward she turned me into." I turned the small device over in my palm, feeling its weight so light, physically so heavy with implication. 2 years. My son had spent 2 years building a case against his own wife, while living under her roof, while sharing her bed, while letting her believe she had him completely under her control. The courage that must have required the constant fear of discovery, the isolation of carrying such a secret alone. I couldn't imagine it. But I still had one question. The one that had haunted me since Thomas first showed me the petition with Daniel's signature. "Why did you sign it?" I asked. "The guardianship petition. If you knew what she was, if you were collecting evidence against her, why did you sign a document that could have destroyed me?" Daniel's face crumbled completely. He buried his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Because she said if I didn't, she'd leave and take the kids," he finally managed. "She'd move to another state somewhere I couldn't follow, and I'd never see them again. Tyler and Emma, they're everything to me, Dad. I couldn't lose them." He looked up, his face wet with tears. "And she said something else. She said if I ever tried to expose her, she'd tell everyone that I knew about Florida from the beginning, that I was complicit, that I helped her plan what she was going to do to you." His voice cracked. "She said I'd go to prison too, and my children would grow up knowing their father was a monster. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in years. Not at the accomplice I had feared, not at the conspirator I had suspected, but at a man who had been caught in a web as suffocating as any physical prison. Melissa had used his love for his children as a weapon, had turned his conscience against him, had made him believe that silence was his only option. "You were a prisoner too," I said quietly. "Just like me. Just like your mother was afraid you would become." Daniel's eyes widened. Mom knew. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out envelope number 3, still sealed, Eleanor's handwriting, still crisp and clear on the front. Daniel's name written with the love of a mother who had seen the danger coming years before it arrived. "Your mother left this for you," I said, placing it in his hands. "She wrote it 7 years ago before she died, before any of this happened." Daniel stared at the envelope, at his name in his mother's familiar script. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold it. "She knew," he whispered, "about Melissa, about everything." I nodded slowly. She knew everything. She saw what Melissa was from the very beginning, even when the rest of us were blind. She spent years building protections, planning for exactly this moment. I watched my son clutch the envelope to his chest the way I had clutched Eleanor's first letter to mine. "And she still wanted you to have a chance," I said. "That's what this letter is, Daniel. Your mother's last gift, the chance she always believed you deserved." Daniel held the envelope for a long time without opening it, his fingers tracing the letters of his name as if he could absorb his mother's presence through the paper itself. The lobby of the sheriff's station was not the setting any of us would have chosen for this moment. But some things cannot wait for appropriate surroundings. Some things demand to happen when they happen, regardless of where you are. Finally, with hands that shook so badly he could barely control them, Daniel broke the seal. Inside were 2 items. The first was a photograph slightly faded with age but still vivid in its captured joy. Daniel is a boy, maybe 7 years old, sitting on Eleanor's lap in our backyard garden. They were both laughing at something outside the frame. I remembered that day. Remembered taking the picture. Remembered how Eleanor's laughter had filled the air like music. The roses were in bloom behind them, and sunlight caught the golden highlights in Daniel's hair. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. Then he unfolded the letter. I didn't read over his shoulder. The words were between Eleanor and her son, a private conversation that had waited 7 years to take place. But I watched his face as he read, watched the emotions move across his features, like weather across a landscape. Grief, recognition, shame, and finally, something that looked almost like hope. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes that held more vulnerability than I had seen in him since he was a child. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew everything, and she still—" He couldn't finish. "May I asked, gesturing toward the letter. He handed it to me without hesitation, and I read the words my wife had written 7 years before in the careful handwriting I knew better than my own. "My sweet Daniel," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then you've made a choice. I don't know what that choice was, but I know you had to make one. That's the hardest part of being human, having to choose when every option hurts." I could hear her voice so clearly, that gentle wisdom she had carried through every challenge of our life together. "I saw the woman you married for what she was. I tried to warn you without pushing you away, but I failed. That's my burden to carry even now. But I also saw something else, the little boy I raised. The one who cried when he stepped on a caterpillar because he couldn't bear to hurt anything. The one who made me breakfast in bed on every birthday, even when the eggs were burned and the toast was cold. The one who held my hand when I was sick and promised he would take care of his father when I was gone." My vision blurred. I had to pause before continuing. "That boy is still in you somewhere, Daniel. I know he is because I put him there with every story I read, every lesson I taught you, every moment of love I poured into raising you. Don't let her bury him completely. Don't let her convince you that who she made you become is who you really are. You can still choose. You can always choose. It's not too late." The letter continued on the back of the page, Eleanor's handwriting growing slightly more cramped as she ran out of space. "I can't tell you to forgive yourself. That's not mine to give. I can't tell your father to forgive you. That's his choice alone, and I would never take it from him. But I can tell you this love doesn't disappear when people make mistakes. It doesn't evaporate because someone we raised becomes someone we don't recognize. It just has to find a new shape, a harder shape sometimes, a shape that includes grief and disappointment alongside the tenderness, but it's still love. It's always love. The final lines were written in larger script as if Eleanor wanted to make sure they couldn't be missed. I love you forever, Daniel. Nothing changes that. Not distance, not time, not even the worst choices you might make. You're my son, and you always will be. Mom. I handed the letter back to Daniel, who clutched it against his chest the way a drowning man clutches a life preserver. His body shook with sobs he no longer tried to suppress, years of suppressed guilt and fear, finally releasing in the sterile fluorescent light of a county sheriff's station. I didn't embrace him. I wasn't ready for that. The wounds were too fresh. The betrayals too recent. Forgiveness is not something you can summon on command, no matter how much you might want to. But I put my hand on his shoulder and let it rest there, feeling the tremors that ran through him, offering what I could offer in that moment. Presence. The acknowledgement that he was still my son. A beginning, however fragile, of something that might someday become reconciliation. We sat like that for a long time, father and son connected by a hand on a shoulder, and the words of a woman who had loved us both enough to prepare for this moment years before it arrived. The months that followed brought changes I couldn't have anticipated. The federal case against Melissa expanded as investigators uncovered additional evidence of fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Margaret Morrison was arrested in Florida, charged as a co-conspirator in schemes that stretched back decades. The anonymous source who had sent me those crucial emails was never identified, but I suspected Daniel wasn't the only one who had grown tired of living under Melissa's control. In October, I received word that Melissa had agreed to testify against her mother in exchange for a reduced sentence. The woman who had nearly destroyed my family would spend years in prison, but not the decades she might have faced otherwise. I felt nothing when I heard the news. She'd become irrelevant to me, a chapter that was finally closing. What mattered more was simpler, quieter, and far more meaningful. Christmas was coming again. And this year, for the first time in 6 years, I would not spend it alone. 1 year changes everything and nothing. The lake outside my window still reflects the same cypress trees, the same herons still fish along the shoreline at dawn, and the chair on my porch still holds the shape of my solitary mornings. But the silence that once felt like abandonment now feels like peace. The solitude that once ached with rejection now hums with purpose. I'm the same man I was a year ago, and I'm entirely different. Christmas Eve arrived with the scent of pine and cinnamon drifting through my villa, mingling with laughter and conversation I never expected to hear within these walls. The house glowed with lights. I had strung myself white and gold, the colors Eleanor always preferred, and every window flickered with the warmth of candles she would have chosen. I had decorated not out of obligation or desperate hope, but because beauty matters, because celebration matters, because I had finally learned that joy doesn't require an audience to be real. My guests gathered in the living room, their voices weaving together in the easy rhythm of genuine friendship. Thomas Reed stood by the fireplace with his wife Margaret, a woman whose warmth matched her husband's quiet wisdom. Officer Linda Carver. Linda now? Just. Linda sat on the couch, trading stories with my neighbors the Hendersons, who had welcomed me into their community without question or judgment. Others filled the spaces between the librarian who had recommended books during my lonely first months, here the young couple who ran the cafe where I took my morning coffee, people who had become friends simply because I had finally allowed myself to be found. None of them were family by blood. All of them were family by choice. I was refilling glasses of mulled wine when the knock came, soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. The room quieted as I walked to the door, though I hadn't asked anyone to stop talking. Perhaps they sensed what I sensed. Perhaps they knew who was waiting on the other side. Daniel stood on the porch snow, beginning to dust his shoulders, his hands empty at his sides. He looked older than he had a year ago, but also somehow lighter, as if shedding his secrets had allowed him to stand straighter. His eyes met mine with an uncertainty I recognized, the fear of rejection, the desperate hope for connection. "I didn't bring gifts," he said quietly. "I didn't know if I should come at all. He paused, gathering himself. "I didn't want you to be alone again. Even if you don't want me here, I needed you to know that I'm trying to be different. I'm in therapy now. I'm learning to stand up to speak the truth, even when it's hard." He swallowed. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Dad. I don't know if I've earned that. I'm asking if we can start over, slowly, if you're willing." I looked at my son for a long moment, seeing both the man who had signed a petition against me and the boy who had cried over caterpillars, seeing both the coward who had stayed silent and the witness who had ultimately chosen truth. The two Daniels existed in the same person, the same way darkness and light exist in every human heart. Your mother once told me that love has to find new shapes when things break. I said, I don't know what shape this becomes. I don't know if we can rebuild what was lost or if we'll have to build something entirely different, but you can come in, Daniel. We can try. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. Daniel crossed the threshold with the tentative steps of a man entering sacred ground, unsure if he belonged but desperate to try. Behind him, snow began to fall in earnest, thick flakes swirling in the porch light, like something from a Christmas card Eleanor might have chosen. The evening unfolded with gentle conversations and careful laughter. Daniel sat quietly at first, listening more than speaking, accepting the welcome my friends offered without presuming he deserved it. Slowly, gradually, he began to relax. By the time dessert was served, he was telling stories about Tyler and Emma, and I realized I was hearing about my grandchildren for the first time in years. Later, after the guests had gone and Daniel had left with promises to call, I stood alone in my living room, surveying the beautiful wreckage of a successful gathering. Glasses waiting to be washed, chairs askew, the lingering scent of good food and better company. On the mantel, Eleanor's photograph watched over it all, her smile as warm as it had been in life. I walked over and touched the frame gently the way I had 1,000 times before. I was never forgotten, I whispered. You made sure of that. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. You gave me the tools to build this life, even when I didn't know I needed them. I looked around the room at the evidence of friendships I had cultivated, at the door my son had finally walked through, at the home I had created, not by waiting for permission, but by choosing to live fully. I stopped waiting to be wanted, I said softly, still speaking to her photograph, but also finally to myself. I chose myself instead, and it turns out that was the invitation I needed all along. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and for the first time in 6 years, Christmas felt exactly like it was supposed to, not perfect, not complete, but full of possibility, full of hope, full of love, finding its new shape. And so my story ends not with revenge, but with reclamation, not with destruction, but with rebuilding. Eleanor saved me from beyond the grave, not because she doubted my strength, but because she loved me enough to prepare for battles she knew I would have to fight alone. Her letters, her trust, her quiet planning, these were not signs of distrust in me. They were the purest expressions of love I have ever known. Melissa is serving her sentence now, and her mother Margaret will likely spend the rest of her days behind bars. The guardianship petition was dismissed, the trust remains intact, and the villa by the lake is filled with more laughter than silence these days. Daniel and I are learning to be father and son again, one careful conversation at a time. It is not easy. Some days the old wounds still ache, but we are trying, and trying is more than I ever thought we would have. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you have felt pushed aside, forgotten, dismissed by the very people who should cherish you, I want you to know something important. You do not need anyone's permission to matter. You do not need an invitation to live fully. Choose yourself, protect yourself, and never ever mistake kindness for weakness. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose yourself when no one else would subscribe to this channel? So you never miss another story of resilience, justice, and the quiet power of dignity. Until next time, remember, you are never too old to start over, and it is never too late to choose yourself.